In this video, we're going to explore a different format when it comes to vintage gaming memories. I think this also serves for educational purposes too. You'll see what I mean right about now. Hello and welcome back to Vintage Gaming Memories. I appreciate your interest to the channel, whether it's your first time here or a return visit. Please subscribe to help support and grow this channel with me, and let's get right to this. So as you can see here, I've got some stuff lying on the floor by my Atari display area. It's very much of a vintage gaming memory of mine, maybe of yours as well. I can remember back to 1982 when I was playing games on my Atari 800 and also wanting to program in BASIC with more than those basic line 10, print, quote, I rule, end quote, and then line 20, go to 10. I did type more complex lines of code than that. However, the graphics part, I wasn't aware of how to fully take advantage of that. Then came this, the very first issue of Antic, the Atari resource. This is when I fully appreciated reading as opposed to reading my comics. I remember how I couldn't wait to get the next issue just so I can type in those 60 to maybe 80 lines of code for a new program or perhaps a game. And then all those rem or remark lines, which gave you clues as to what you were creating with each line of code. And then you always had to make sure you typed it in accurately. And then you always double checked and always wondered, is that a colon or is that a semicolon? Because you didn't want to type run and then get that error and have to recheck all the lines again. I know I found some typos that in later issues they would have it noted in the front section of their I/O board or the help commentary. And then you felt like you were so smart because you knew it first. I know they had that checksum table you could also use to compare what you typed with a typo program it was called. I think it was called TYPO. I never used that because, just think about it. That would just take all the fun out of it if you'd have to go ahead and know what your problems were before you actually have to debug each line of code. So how many of you remember those days? I truly credit Atari for preparing and perhaps setting the path for me to be my career that I'm in today. It started so early in my life, before I was a teenager, I was able to type very fast. And then I actually learned the home keys and how to properly raise your forearms so you wouldn't get carpal tunnel. And that wasn't because I knew what carpal tunnel was. It just felt more comfortable after you're typing for hours at the keyboard. You just didn't want that cramp. And then I went to high school. They were teaching you that form and format, and I was already ahead of the curve. So then I went to college to become a court stenographer due to my typing speed and accuracy, even though that the stenograph machine is all shorthand. But that's a story for another video, since I do have that stenograph machine from 1989 in my collection today. These Antic magazines you see right here, they can actually make you travel back in time. For example, I remember this issue that had the public domain game to type in called Snowbird. This was a January 1984 issue, and I lived in Chicago at the time, so I can totally relate to the theme of the game, which made it even more exciting to type it in. There was a lot of games like this that if I go through this, it just kind of sparks memories of a point in my life and time. And again, those are those great memories that kind of act like therapy sometimes, for me at least. The covers of these issues of Antic were etched in my memory to this day. I mean, just looking at some of these, I can just totally remember like, oh yeah, this would have been around 1985 or 1986. Now, I didn't own my Atari near the probably later half of Antic's publications, and that was because I sold my Atari and everything with it to buy my first car when I turned 16. But if you look at some of these, it's like artwork, especially the early issues of Antic. I mean, there were just truly pictures on the front cover that were not of people. As you could tell at the later issues, they actually had real photos in there. But the earlier ones were actually artwork. A lot of graphic design to it. So I think they're just beautiful looking. And they probably make for some great thumbnails with all those colors. Now, since I'm mentioning color, that name Antic for the magazine is in reference to the Antic chip on the 8-bit. Now, let's see here. Do you know what the acronym Antic stands for? I'll give you a second. Okay, time's up. It stands for Atari Nukes Through Its Competition. Yeah, not the best. I couldn't think of anything quick enough, but that's not true. But it is true that it did, but that's not really the correct words for that acronym. It's actually Alphanumeric Television Interface Controller. Now, to be honest, I had to look it up because I forgot what the T stood for. I wonder how many of you actually knew that. You will find this Antic chip on the motherboards of the Atari 8-bit computers that you see right over there. And you actually also find this on the Atari 5200 gaming console, which you have to point that out over on that side. Now, Antic, the Atari Resource magazine, came out with its first issue on April 1982. It's the one on the top left corner on the floor, which is probably hard to see, so here's a close-up of it. It's very clean and vanilla looking compared to the issues that followed, but that's all right. I like that it has that red and black and white color to it. And then you have this handyman on a ladder putting up like the final letter C on the word Antic as to say as if it was complete and now it's ready to be released to the public. The editorial on this introductory issue is perfect too. I was just reading it just the other day actually as I was getting this prepared. Let me just read you a few of the sentences I thought that were pretty funny, or not funny, but interesting to say the least. It goes as follows. We are dedicated Atari enthusiasts who have been involved with the 800 and 400 since it came on the market back in late 1979. We have varied backgrounds. Some of us are computer professionals, and some of us are what I've come to call Atari professionals, very motivated Atari users. What we have in common is our enthusiasm for home computing, especially using Atari, and our desire to share this enthusiasm. We've looked carefully at the Atari user community and watched it grow until now. There are approximately 100,000 users. That's just interject. That's pretty amazing. 100,000 users back in 1982. Most of us at the magazine have been involved in computer clubs and newsletter publications. We now think it's time Atari users had their own dedicated publication, a resource which can be turned to for help and up-to-date information. And it goes on for a few more paragraphs. But that last part about being a resource for help and up-to-date information, that's what we call the internet today, right? That's probably why a lot of these paper publications have gone away or just transitioned to electronic format on the internet. Back with Antic here, the Atari Resource magazine, they started with Volume 1, Number 1, on April of 1982, and they ended with Volume 9, Number 2, on June/July 1990. That's a span of a little more than 8 years, and there were 88 issues published, along with a Best of Antic book, which you can see right in the middle of my pile over there. That was from 1983 to complete the full set. And as you can see, all these are in resealable magazine protective covers, which is why there's a little bit of a glare in the video, but I think you could still make out what these magazines look like from the top. I have all of these on a display carousel, along with some other sets of Atari-related magazines, such as Analog, which I'll cover in another video. But I do have the electronic version in PDF format for all of those that you see here, which really is a bonus because it's extremely easy and fast to find things within there. And it's actually easy to read, too, so you don't have to carry the magazine and open them up out of the protective seal and then hope that you don't crease it or rip it. Just want to give you guys an example of how the Antic magazines progressed in time. So we got here is that first issue that I mentioned, and you can see, you know, it's very plain. And how thin it is. I mean, I think there's like 30 or so pages in there. It wasn't large. And that's understandable for a first issue of a magazine that just launched. But then, as we just jump to perhaps, there's this issue number 4. Pretty cool. And it's gotten a lot thicker. And then you kind of go further down the volumes. This is volume 5. So this is now we're looking at 5 years later, and you can kind of see the image is kind of just a stage photo of a robot. You know, it's fine, but you know, more modern, and you can see how thick it is. definitely a lot thicker. You get more for your money back then, right? What was this, $3.50 US dollars? And then near the end, here is, I just want to get the mailing label shown here, but this is one of the last ones. This is 1987, volume 6, number 6, and it's got a football player on the front. It almost looks like a, a Sports Illustrated cover, which I did, I just thought it's interesting to see how they just really changed the marketing of these magazines. But by then, anyways, I no longer owned the Atari, so I wasn't crying or critiquing this back then. I was pretty much already driving and learning how it is to spend money on girls. That just gives you an example how marketing and how the trends change a little bit for the Atari magazines, and probably magazines in general, as we'll look at the analog that has a long life as well. And you can see the progression of those magazines, how it started and to where it ended. Well, that's a wrap for this video. Comment below and let me know if you have a collection like this as well, or maybe you're starting one or wanting to start one. It's never too late to keep your gaming passion from the past alive by living it today. Take care, everyone.